So we're going to get into a little bit of your the meat of this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit more about your products. So, in a nutshell, and this is something that a certain user, specifically Mr. At LiveRock, asked us to ask. What is PNS ProBio? And explain it to me like I'm five. And probably that's probably the best way to explain it to me. So please explain it to me like I'm five.
PNSB stands for purple non-sulfur bacteria. Their name implies there's a purple sulfur bacteria, which there is. The purple non-sulfurs don't depend on sulfur quite like the sulfur bacteria do. They're a little bit more adaptable. So I take one step back and say these are incredibly ancient organisms, by the way, like 3.5 billion years old. One of the first or most primitive organisms on Earth, which doesn't necessarily mean they're simple because they've had a hell of a long time to evolve. So they can perform just about every form of metabolism, for example. So as I said earlier, they're photosynthetic. But they're not obligate phototrophs, so they can live in complete darkness.
Wow.
Okay, they prefer the anaerobic environments that they evolved in. They appeared on Earth before there was much oxygen. Oxygen actually came from the emergence of cyanobacteria, which actually evolved from purple non-sulfur bacteria.
Are they kind of related? Sorry, I don't mean to jump in there, but like, are they related in a sense or no?
Basically, cyanobacteria are the ancestors of purple non-sulfur bacteria.
Huh, that's
but yeah, different types of bacteria. It's weird because they're promiscuous in a weird way. Like they can exchange completely unrelated bacteria can exchange genetic information. So we actually believe that cyanobacteria evolved from an ancestor that was a chimera of purple non-sulfur bacteria and green sulfur bacteria.
Wow.
But anyway, so cyanobacteria, as we know, are oxygenic. Their photosynthesis is much like plants. In fact, green algae and then modern plants. Plants evolved from green algae, chlorophytes, and chlorophytes evolved from cyanobacteria. They're all oxygenic phototrophs. They make oxygen. These are purple non-sulfur bacteria are anoxygenic. Their photosynthesis does not produce oxygen. And in fact, they cannot perform photosynthesis in an aerobic environment. They can survive in an aerobic environment, but they can't perform photosynthesis. So moving on from all that, so they prefer anaerobic environments, but they can survive in an aerobic environment. So in that case, they're just complete heterotrophs, like so many of the bacteria that live in bacterioplankton.
So at that point, which would you say they prefer, though? At that point,
they prefer illuminated anaerobic environments. That's where they can. That's where they can perform photosynthesis, and it's also where they can perform denitrification.
Okay.
And it's also where they can perform in anaerobic environments where they can perform nitrogen fixation, which is the opposite of denitrification. They take nitrogen gas and make it into ammonia that they then use to make their own tissues. So that's how all bioavailable nitrogen is introduced into an ecosystem, is through nitrogen fixation.
And it sounds like this bacteria is like one of those. It sounds like it's amazing because like if you have a deep sand bed or something like that, you have almost those little pockets that can kind of help you kind of keep this bacteria growing and thriving within your tank, right?
Totally. So one really weird, interesting thing, I saw a couple papers actually that relate to that. One was that, we always were told that live rock enhances denitrification. And we've seen papers now that suggest that's not so. Nitrification, yes. There's a lot of surface area on the outside, and it's favorable for those types of microbes to grow. But for whatever reason, deeper within. It's just maybe it's because it gets covered with other things and the passage of nutrients is impeded in some way. So, but live rock is not good for denitrification. And what's interesting, we always think sand is so great, and it is better, but I was reading a paper that just was like, whoa, that's cool. But I didn't think that. I never thought about that before, but it totally makes sense. They were looking at substrates in a natural environment. And I'm not just talking about PNSB now, but all denitrifying bacteria. They found that there was just as much denitrification where you had like kind of small chunks of rubble sometimes where there was a lot of water movement, but the water movement was all like, between the chunks, and the denitrification occurred inside of the chunks.
That's kind of interesting.
These are always like porous, right? Like
so it sounds like that's kind of a push for the industry in general. They're coming out with a lot of the bio rocks or biospheres or bio whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to see that shift.
Or even people that don't have the sand bed. There's always that debate: should I have a go bare bottom or have a sand bed? Well, it has nothing to do with like aesthetic preferences or I get pissed off when the sand blows all over or whatever. What you should be asking is, what kind of corals am I keeping? Am I going to keep like SPS corals that come from a high energy environment where there's a lot of waves crashing and strong currents, and you don't see sand in those places. Those fine sediments get carried away and deposited elsewhere. That's where you'll actually see like rubble or just bare rock. So a bared bottom tank actually is appropriate for that, for SPS, or where you're going to have really strong water flow. On the other hand, if you're going to have like Cataphilia and fungia and things that are in less turbulent water or in lagoons, because they're deeper water, whatever, then yeah, you could have like some sand or gravel, but you'll actually get the effect of denitrification even in an SPS tank if you have like just like a rubbly bottom. If the chunks are just the right size, probably a thumb size chunks of rubble just to kind of cover the bottom, because the denitrification actually takes place within the chunks of gravel.
So it's interesting. You see a lot of people have so many different opinions on you should go bare bottom if you're doing SPS. And it's like I'm one of the type of people who wants to keep a mixed reef, and it's almost like a panacea. Like nobody knows what you can do in a mixed reef, but that's what I want to do. And it's not easy to pull off, but like it's I feel like a fine line that people have to walk to find all the balance between nutrients and nutrient export, right? So that kind of takes us to yellow snow in general. Yellow snow is one of those products that I don't know much about, so that's why we're asking you, what is yellow snow?
Yellow snow. If you don't mind, I'll start with ProBio because actually yellow snow is made with ProBio. PNS ProBio. Just have one handy here. That's the one with the red. Yeah, right. That's the one with the red dot or red cap. This was the flagship product. This particular product contains one species of purple non-sulfur bacteria, a really common one in aquaculture and also just in the wild. It's ubiquitous on Earth, called Rhodopseudomonas palustris. This particular product, so the bacteria itself is very different based on how it's grown, right? So we were saying it can be a denitrifier, it can be a nitrogen fixer, it can also be a nitrifier in an aerobic environment. These guys are actually, in this product, they're cultivated on plant extracts. And why does that matter? Well, the particular extracts are from a plant that we harvest. It's an invasive plant, actually. But we harvest that from the wild with a permit. And it's rich in these allelochemicals, the type of substances that some plants release to inhibit others, or corals, soft corals.
Mhm.
noxious substances. In this case, it's a tannin,
Mm.
and tannins are hard to degrade for a lot of bacteria. But they're basically like the yellowing compounds we see from algae from our refugiums um, or even in planted aquarium tanks. A lot of it comes from plants leaching it. It comes
Mhm.
from composition of dead leaves and things like that. We see this a lot in ponds. Anyway, it's hard to degrade because of the chemical structure of the tannins themselves. Just like the cellulose that plants and algae are made of, their cell walls, basically the bark or whatever, the paper that we make it out of. It's not very soluble, and it's fungi or most fungi are pretty good at breaking it down. Not a lot of bacteria. These particular bacteria are. So with ProBio, these guys come out of the bottle adapted to consume like cellulose, lignin, all these tannins, all these really hard to degrade plant-based substances. So it's actually, and it's cultivated in fresh water, by the way. So this will be notable because the other products are different, but ProBio can be used in a fresh or saltwater
Mm.
environment,
Okay.
because it's basically it's a freshwater culture. Um, so people can use it in their freshwater tanks to break down like leaf litter and things like that, or in a pond, um, or in an aquarium. It would be like the dead little bits of chetomorpha at the
Yeah.
bottom of your refugium, or that stuff that piles up that's hard to get at. It degrades all that where other bacteria cannot um, consume those recalcitrant organics. So
So,
it's useful in that way.
mhm.
Um, yeah,
I was going
so
to say a question popped up actually. They're curious to hear about the state and function of the PNSB and the yellow snow. So is it dead or is it lysed or is
yeah,
it like how might
yeah. So
corals
moving
treat it
on to
differently
yellow
than
snow.
ProBio? Yeah.
Yeah, so yellow snow is it's a simulated marine snow. Marine snow is it's an incredibly important food source in the natural environment. So it's grossly overlooked in the aquarium industry, in my opinion.
Hmm.
We've had some people have made some attempts to replicate it, but I basically, with this product, tried to reverse engineer the real thing, using the seed particles, as they call them, that actually start the process of attracting heterotrophic bacteria that grow on the particle, try to consume it, and as they live there and attach there to the substrate, the little particle, they form these to stick together to each other, these polysaccharides, and make biofilms, right? And they're sticky. So that's why these particles stick to each other and they clump and they make what they call marine snowflakes. They get to a certain size, they become negatively buoyant, and they sink. And you see that in the open ocean. It's usually dead um, copepod
Mhm.
carcasses, the chitin.
The times that I've seen it,
That's
I've always seen it in very deep water environments. So it's like one of those. It seems to occur in more other spaces that are obviously not very deep water. So it's like it sounds like it's a mixture of everything, and it's that
Yeah.
blend
Well,
that
it's
kind of
incredibly
yeah.
important in deep water environments because it delivers productivity from the photic zone, the illuminated areas of the ocean where the algae too, actually, their cell walls, the cellulose, which
Hmm.
is not easily degradable. It takes a long time for bacteria to break that down. So it has a long time to sink. Basically, stuff grows on it, but yeah, that delivers. So marine snow isn't really nutritious because of the cellulose or the chitin. Those things are essentially indigestible to most organisms, especially animals. What's nutritious about marine snow is frankly all the shit that grows on it.
All right.
So all the bacteria, right? Um, so what yellow snow is base. Purple non-sulfur bacteria are one of lots of different kinds of bacteria you might find growing on marine snow. Uh, but so what we do is we use uh, uh, a source of chitin that's crab based.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it's a crab shell, but it's essentially the same thing as like a a copepod exoskeleton fragment, whatever. And then it has the cellulose in it too, of course, from the ProBio itself. But we photoferment these particles in a carboy, and it's rich with yeast. Yeast is an additional source of chitin because yeast, their cell wall, has a lot of chitin in it.
Mhm.
But just as importantly, yeast are rich in vitamin B, which these bacteria can more or less synthesize, but they're a lot more productive when they can get it exogenously, when they can take it from the environment and don't have to bother wasting energy making it themselves, because it is an essential nutrient. So the culture medium is rich in everything these bacteria need. So in the course of like 3 days under light, they grow like crazy, sticky, and form all these clumps.
Hmm.
And here is a good time to run around. People are getting fatigued staring at the
I was going to say,
same.
I'm actually going to be passing this conversation off to Polaris for a quick second. I'm
Sure.
going to shut my video off, but he's going to pop in. But feel free to give us a little tour. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm really going to enjoy the little bit of a shift here.
This is a carboy of yellow snow, and it's yellow for a reason. It's rich in cobalamin, which is cobalamin, which is a vitamin B12. So that it's anyway, it's important not just for the growth of the bacteria, but both corals and zooxanthellae require cobalamin in their diet, and they cannot synthesize it. So that's one of the things about yellow snow that seems to be beneficial for corals. So yellow snow is not a live product. We photo ferment it for 3 days, and then it's pasteurized so that it's stable in the bottle. And then at that point, it has to be refrigerated. But yeah, so this is yellow snow in the bottle. And as you can see, it's pretty clear when it isn't shaken up. I know one of the questions was about the particle sizes. And just so let me hit something about natural reefs. So yellow or marine snow occurs in coral reefs. It's usually, so the seed particle is usually little bits of, it could be all kinds of things, including copepod exoskeletons, but it can also be little globs of coral mucus, which bacteria really like. But on a coral reef, depending on the type of water movement, you see different sizes of the particles, because where there's a lot of wave action, those big snowflakes get pounded into smaller pieces, which is kind of a neat thing here that you can actually replicate with this product. It sticks all to the bottom. If you can see the snow kind of like at the bottom, it's really like it's like a snow globe, right? It's like totally clear. You can see where it's like yellowish because of the B vitamins, but there isn't a lot of particles up here. And then
as soon as you shake it, you see that kind of stuff come down. Yeah, no, that's pretty amazing.
Right. So you can get these big ass clumps, right? So to answer that other person's question, I mean, yeah, the size particles go all the way down to the individual bacteria, which are only like 1.5, 2 microns, all the way up to like these easily visible, like big chunks, that you might.
Somebody did ask what photo ferment means, and I'm not going to pretend to know what the answer is.
No,
but it almost sounds like
question.
It sounds like yellow snow is almost like that magnet that kind of brings or latches onto, or brings rather, it holds on all the other bacteria that are kind of floating in the water column, right? But please tell us what photo ferment means.
Yeah, photo fermentation is just a term that applies to any processes where you have a phototrophic organism that is a heterotroph. So they're using light as a source of energy, but their source of carbon is an organic carbon. So as opposed to, say, CO2 like an algae would use. So in this case, they're obviously they're on light. They're photosynthesizing. We think actually that's we put them on light so they have the light available. But one thing about these bacteria, and that was one of the only things that was mentioned by Sprung and DeBalk in that book, actually, is that they, in the Reef Aquarium Volume 3, is that these bacteria will actually stop using photosynthesis if their environment is really rich in organic substances, copiotrophic. So that may be happening in there, but we apply the light in. That's what the term photofermentation means. Basically, they're using light. It's like photosynthesis, but the source of carbon is organic.
I appreciate that answer, and I'm pretty sure it satisfies at Dick, so Dickie, I'll give you a little background on him. He's a beer guy. He makes beer all the time, so he has a very interesting background. But I feel like he's going to ask questions later on. So let's just move on to what substrate sauce is, because that's your third product that you. So I saw it wasn't listed on your site, and we'll probably be sending out these links to the actual chat in a second. So substrate sauce, it seems to be listed on only Algae Barn for right now, but I want to know what it is, and I feel like other people do as well.
Yeah. So any store can sell substrate sauce. When we came out with that product, it was we just don't sell it on our website. It was a favor to our stores and also to especially to brick and mortars, so that they don't have to necessarily compete with us direct or whatever.
Okay.
A lot of the LFSs actually that we deal with now through our distributor appreciated that. But so yeah, it is available at LG, and it may be available at your LFS, but we'll get to that in a bit. We'll talk about our distributor. Substrate sauce is quite a bit. So this is a live product. This contains the same bacteria as ProBio and an additional one. So it has Rhodopseudomonas palustris, but it also has another purple non-sulfur bacterium, Rhodospirillum rubrum. They look really different. Rhodospirillum, I think, is even more ancient, even though it's really weird. It's got this corkscrew shape to it. And it has like the most beautiful carotenoids. It's like this weird hot purple color. Maybe I'll show some cultures of that. But
That's actually pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah, so what that product is for is entirely different than ProBio. So ProBio is kind of like, to be honest, everybody's always asking like about, nitrates, phosphates, will it eat my detritus? Just like I said at Algae Barn, it was, when it's originally when I was working on developing this and getting interested in it, my focus was on using it as a food organism, right? As a live planktonic food. So that's kind of what ProBio is all about. But we did have a lot of people asking for a product that could be used to consume ammonia, nitrate, phosphate. So substrate sauce.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I feel bad for keeping all these people here, but we can talk. I'm sure I can talk to you for ages.
Yeah, well, I'll run through substrate sauce real quick,
Please.
and then we can get on to other stuff. But the main difference with substrate sauce is that it is designed for cycling, especially, but mainly nutrient control, especially nitrogen. So that one is that's why I went to all the lengths to explain what we put in ProBio is because it's entirely different with substrate sauce. So the biggest difference isn't that we have this additional species of bacteria in it. The biggest difference is how they're raised. So they're raised on an entirely different culture medium, and they do adapt. So for example, the bacterium ProBio and the Rhodopseudomonas that's in ProBio is genetically identical to the Rhodopseudomonas that is in substrate sauce. They're basically clones of each other, but they behave completely differently. Even though they're identical genotypically, they're totally different phenotypically. In other words, they're expressing completely different genes because of their environment. In the case of substrate sauce, and these are cultures of the two bacteria. They're cultured separately. If you can still see me how I'm.
No, we can see you perfectly. Don't worry about
So
this.
this is Rhodopseudomonas, and this is Rhodospirillum, and in both cases they're raised on mineral meat. So these guys are actually cultivated on ammonia. And they're cultivated on phosphate, like inorganic, straight, simple mineral. So yeah, ammonium bicarbonate and potassium phosphate.
Okay.
So they're more adapted to consuming ammonia. So and also they're cultivated in a marine environment. So they're specifically designed to cycle saltwater tanks, right?
So anybody that's looking to cycle a tank should be leaning towards substrate sauce, is what I'm getting out of this conversation. It's one of those that it seems like the live bacteria kind of makes a huge impact in terms of how it can kind of filter and kind of keep growing within a home aquaria, right?
Totally, except that you would only start out with this one because it has an excess of phosphate.
Okay.
So substrate sauce it'll bring at full dose it'll bring your phosphate up about zero point zero 0.05 parts per million.
So this
So
is
just
not
a little bit
something
of phosphate,
this is not
but
something that somebody wants to use in a regular reef tank.
well, actually, some people, yeah. So I have
I mean,
people that
if
are
you're
asking, they're like, "Well, I have to
makes
dose
sense.
phosphate," and I'm like, "Well, okay, in that case, but just be warned, it has a lot of phosphate in it, and the reason is so especially when people are doing fishless cycling,
Yes.
they don't have
Right,
enough
right, yeah.
phosphate to grow all the bacteria, including the nitrified. So this product has enough phosphate with it when you dose to actually allow them to proliferate rapidly in an environment like that. That's essentially like clean.
Okay.
Before
Yeah, I
you've
mean,
added a lot of like dirty rock or started
yeah.
adding fish and things like that.
I was gonna say a lot of people know that they start with they're starting with dry rock or dead rock. It could be pretty rough because things can get out of hand real quick. But if you have that bacteria that kind of fixes that imbalance, it'll just kind of start thriving in that environment. And I have somebody
Yeah.
who just messaged me saying that, and I'm going to read this word for word. I'm not reading this right, but who knows? Maybe my pronunciation is off. But this directed phenotypic evolution is something that we do not that we do in the lab with yeast a whole lot, and it is very, very cool. I wouldn't have guessed that
It
the
is.
simple bacteria would be such as reactive. So it's
Mhm.
something that's actually pretty interesting to see that a live bacteria can do something like that.
I would suggest that viewer checks out a blog article on our website, hydrospace.store. It's about the organics one, how it consumes organics. It basically talks about how, like in ProBio, in the culture with that plant material,
Mhm.
it starts out breaking down the cellulose and all that, and then it breaks it into all these other substances, all the way down to CO2. But each
Oh wow,
subsequent generation is adapted to consuming that byproduct. So they produce the waste, and then the next generation is adapted to consuming that waste product all the way down through acetate to CO2. It's
that's cool.
pretty amazing, actually, how adaptive they are.
I
Uh,
could talk to you about this for ages. We need to move on. I feel like
sure.
this. I thought this was going to take like a 45-minute conversation, be quick. We're at
I
15
warned you,
minutes right now,
dude.
so I apologize to everybody else who's listening. Let's get into the audience questions right now. So Reefy Reef, Mr. Ash himself, he's actually somebody I'm really cool with on Instagram. He's a good guy. He's actually starting up a new tank, and he's very concerned about biodiversity. For him, that's something he's starting up a brand new tank. He had a small, like, what is it, 14 gallons or something like that. It thrived, it did well, and now he's starting a brand new spanking. It's a new innovative. It's shiny and brand new. So his question to you is, since biodiversity is so important to him, and he's going to be seeding his tank with matured rock in general. It's going to have critters and all sorts of stuff. What product should he be using, and why? And should he be using a mixture of different bacteria?
You could. So if you're still cycling per se, right? If you're still if you're intentionally adding ammonia, trying to encourage nitrifying bacteria to grow, then I would say substrate sauce. By the way, these bacteria are complementary to nitrifiers, like the traditional nitrifiers that you'd see in like turbo start or something like that. So those bacteria are autotrophs. They only use CO2 as a carbon source. They don't like light. They only live in aerobic environments. Total opposite of these guys. So these guys fill a different niche. So they're great when you're trying to develop more biodiversity. They also help keep out some of the undesirable stuff, the preventing the uglies. I never would
Yes.
have thought this when we first developed this product, but I've been hearing a lot of reports that this stuff reduces or even eliminates that the
Ugly phase?
diatom
Oh,
phase in the early succession of the tanks. So not that that's ever really a big deal, but it's interesting,
I
that
mean, for somebody who's new and starting the hobby in general, that could be pretty daunting for in general, right? Like,
Mhm.
so can you mix your, let's say, substrate salts, if you're using that to start a cycle in a tank, is it beneficial to mix it with, let's say, Dr. Tim's or Microbacter or Fritzzyme, whatever? Do you think it's worth it?
Sure. No, well, the problem with a lot of products is nobody. So I'm obviously pretty um, clear about what we do, what we put in our. A lot of these products, they won't even list what species of bacteria are in them. So it's kind of hard to say conclusively what will happen if you mix this or that or in these,
Yeah.
right? Because you don't know what the is in it. So sure, I just anecdotally, a lot of people have used Microbacter 7 with these bacteria successfully. Somebody's used some Dr. Tim's products and they really liked their results. They were
All right.
specifically they had a specific aim. Um, I can't remember, it was cyanobacteria, which these guys definitely compete with.
Yeah, it
And
sounds like
yeah, and of course, like I said, nitrifying bacteria, these guys actually, they complement each other, in fact. So,
this is, I feel like this is a different question because eventually I want to ask about phytoplankton and obviously probio, but let's
yeah,
I'll keep it moving because I feel like I don't want I don't want to get people stuck up and just
please
keep
do.
keep waiting. This
Mhm.
is the next question is from Mr. Preox/Pro. His name is Pro. So for somebody who's looking to try ProBio for the first time, would you recommend ProBio or Yellow Snow? I feel like I know the answer, but I'll let you go.
They're totally different things. So, ProBio is more a live food that is for fine filter feeders. That would include corals because they consume stuff like that through their mucus, by the way. It doesn't even matter if it's an LPS with a big ass mouth, it doesn't matter. That has no bearing on how small of something they can eat. How large, yes, not how small, because infinitely small things like bacteria, they sweep into their mouth with cilia um, uh, in their mucus and consume it that way. So it's that kind of food, and it delivers carotenoids, which are very good for corals in a number of ways. Um, but yellow snow, on the other hand, has B vitamins. It's something that larger, critters that like larger particles can grab.
Hmm.
So, like I was saying with this stuff, like the yellow snow, in terms of like the clumps, like if you want the big clumps,
Hmm.
don't shake it up real hard.
Oh,
If you're feeding really fine things, things that like really fine foods,
shake
shake
it
the
up.
hell out of it, and
Oh,
then
because you really get the
you'll get a
product.
really fine
Yeah.
food. But uh, yeah, they're totally different things. They work together, in fact. For one reason, that the yellow snow, while it's eaten by the corals, it's consumed by the zooxantha. At least the B vitamins are copepods, everything, including these vitamins. Like Algae Barn, for example, sells a combo, and you can get a little bit off the price by buying them together, in fact.
Hmm. How long can yellow snow go in an unrefrigerated state?
You'll regret it. Don't do it. No, it's not a live product. It's just like anything, any other food. Like say a frozen food you thawed out, you let it
Yeah.
sit out a day, you're gonna get divorced. It's like, don't do it. Don't
Okay.
even think about it, especially in a doser in those little tiny tubes. In way.
Fair enough. It's
It,
good to know.
yeah, it's just, you can just put in a little bit a day. Honestly enough, it works really well that way. And
I've
and in
seen
the case
people.
of
Hmm? I was gonna
and
say
in
I've
the
seen people
case
kind of set up little like almost stirrers and little bottles in a refrigerated state. Would that work technically?
Yes, now that would work if you had a refrigerated um if you could
Dosing
put the
setup.
doser in a refrigerated environment, especially with a stir bar,
Yes.
that would be great. Yeah, I've seen stuff like that. That would work as long as where you'd want to you wouldn't want it to sit long in the lines though, so it'd have to constantly move. This stuff it's very nutrient rich, so other bacteria
Mm.
that will invariably be in those lines will foul it. So it would get pretty gross really
So,
fast.
so it sounds like once you kind of have it in that line, it could just latch on to whatever, and it'll clog it up, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, or get foul, and then you know by the time it came out the other end, getting if there were other organisms in there, I vote against that one.
Thank you. That's perfect. That's
And the
the
same,
perfect answer.
and with the bacteria, and this will
Mhm.
address another question I saw. Same thing. Like people ask about dosers, I'm like, why? Like, you just like it's like that's the nice thing about these bacteria. You can't overdose them.
Oh, that was another
I
question.
I throw in ridiculous amounts, right? We've tested these bacteria on LPS, SPS, softies, zoanthids, overdoses of up to 40 times the
Oh,
recommended dose. I can't kill anything that way. It's ridiculous. Like
which is pretty amazing. Yeah.
I've tried to overdose tanks with these products and cannot do it. They're completely harmless.
Well,
Partly
that's
because they don't consume oxygen. A lot of bacteria would harm the tank, not directly by poisoning things or becoming pathogenic, but simply by consuming all the available oxygen.
I wonder if that's the
These
problem
don't do
for
anything like
alchemy in
that.
general going forward. Does it worry at all? Like if you're consuming too much oxygen in your reef tank or no?
Nah, because you can't. These guys don't really do that. They prefer an anaerobic environment.
Okay.
So they're motile. They swim. The daughter cells anyway. They're flagellated, so they swim around in the water,
Oh,
and they're
neat.
also and they sense where they're going. Their swimming is fairly deliberate. They'll swim towards light, away from oxygen.
That's
They'll
amazing.
swim towards a favorable food source. And by the way, corals secrete substances in their mucus to actually attract
Hmm.
this broader type of bacteria to which Rhodosudomonas belongs, the rhizobial bacteria, because they favor them as a food. So they bait them with substances in their mucus. So anyway, these guys swim that. They swim. They definitely swim towards nitrite, and I think towards nitrate for sure.
Hmm.
Uh, so anyway, they'll swim around, but one of the things they do is away from oxygen, right? They'll swim into the deep crevices in your rock or into the
Anaerobic. Gotcha.
detritus. Yeah, so they're not really gonna.
Hmm.
To go back to the doser thing, and
Yeah.
just the broad point is that why dose something that can't be overdosed,
It's
right?
one of those
It's
things.
easy
Everybody
to like,
assumes a doser is necessary for keeping balance and consistency. In a
yeah.
reef tank, everybody's always like, "Oh, consistency is key." And for certain parameters, it makes sense. But this sounds like you're saying, it can't really overdose for
Yeah,
these.
well, a coral reef isn't necessarily as consistent as some people might think. You have upwelling events.
Hmm.
You have different food available changes with weather. For example, if things are getting kicked up off the bottom, there are seasonal variations, or even night and day. Plankton swim up from the deep and into, so there's just like it's a dynamic environment, and the food availability changes all the time. I'm going to say one thing that's really cool about Rhodosudomonas. So they found in, I think it was Acropora. I'm pretty damn sure it was an SPS, but it was a stony coral that was
Hmm.
studied somewhere. They found that so these bacteria also, the corals actually take up these bacteria symbiotically, and that's really, really important. I mean,
Yeah.
I won't even go there because I know we don't have enough time. I could
I was gonna say.
explode on that shit. But for anyone who's interested, the prior issue of Coral magazine, I have an article in there on that, devoted to that. So that's
I'll pull your
Coral
link
Mag-
off that at one point, just because I feel like
excellent.
a lot of people want to see that. Um, but yeah, so I'm actually gonna move on just a smidge. Sorry, I apologize, cut you off.
Go for it.
Uh, so talking about dosers in general, what would you say the average shelf life is for each product? And this is coming from Rabbi Slug. And
Yeah.
he's also
So
asking about the micron regions of yellow snow specifically. But it sounds like that could vary. So, but feel free to hop on.
yeah. Again, you can control that with shaking, but all the way
Mhm.
down to like a micron or two.
Wow.
So the the yellow snow has a shorter shelf life because it's not alive. So that one needs to be refrigerated, and it lasts. We stamp it at 3 months at the time of bottling. So by the time, it goes out freshly made. So it's always the consumer is almost always going to get it a little after 3 months after it's been made. So plenty of time to use it. If you use it as often as you can, you can use it the maximum dose daily on the bottle. The actual date, the use by date is on the bottle. Same with ProBio and substrate sauce, but those are their shelf life is 6 months out from the day of bottling.
Just because they're anaerobic and it's a little bit okay. That makes a little bit more sense in my head, yeah. Because
Yeah.
I mean, once you shut that bottle real quick, it's just okay. Let's not touch it again. Make sure it's in a dark environment. It's okay.
Actually, light is better, but
Oh,
they
all right.
they'll
Put it by the window.
yeah. But the 6 months is for them to be fully viable, and I mean, no problems at all. Like they usually in a bottle like that, most of these cultures will live as long as like 3 years,
Oh,
where
geez.
you can start a new culture with. Yeah. So they just kind of go dormant like a lot of bacteria.
So in terms of inverts and the more demanding corals and stuff like that, is this food spectrum viable enough to kind of feed them all, like tunicate sponges, worms, cucumbers? Is this something that you would say is it's a broad spectrum for all of these, or do you still recommend another food or another something else to kind of supplement?
Yeah. So on a coral reef, by by mass, believe it or not, most filter feeders consume bacteria, not phytoplankton. There are a lot of bacteria on a reef because of the mucus. The coral mucus is a rich source of organics, so it's a lot of heterotrophic bacteria, especially in the plankton. That does not mean that phytoplankton aren't important, and that's how I'm going to answer your question. Phytoplankton have a lot of vitamins and fatty acids, especially that bacteria generally don't have a lot of. So they're actually best used together. So a combination, especially a mixed phyto, because even and one individual species of phyto, if you've worked in a hatchery, you just can't. Most things you can't raise on Nanochloropsis alone or Isochloropsis alone because their fatty acid profile, for example, is not complete or balanced enough to support growth of a lot of animals. Whereas you mix them, great, that's better. Well, if you take that and you mix it with these bacteria, even better. These bacteria are rich in protein, sometimes over 70% protein.
Well,
They don't have a cell wall like algae, the cellulose, right? So fiber, so it's more digestible. They have different carotenoids, one of them being astaxanthin, which is a highly valuable carotenoid, and different the B vitamins. So mixing that with phyto is definitely your best bet.
it's actually interesting you mentioned that we were actually having many conversations about phytoplankton in general. I
Mhm.
recently just started culturing Nanochloropsis,
Mhm.
and I know that I should be mixing it, and I've been debating on whether or not I should be mixing a couple different phytos together. But it sounds like from what you're telling me, it's better to have a good blend of phyto, and it's a complement with the ProBio because they kind of work off of each other.
Absolutely. It's more of a balance. The phytoplankton, for example, is rich in protein, whereas the bacteria is. So there's a study out there using brine shrimp actually. They test these bacteria and then they test, I can't remember which species of phytoplankton, but
Okay.
they did both, and I think they were trying to see if they could support growth on the PNSB alone. I believe it was the same species, the Rhodopseudomonas,
Oh, that's cool.
and they found that it wasn't actually that good because of the lack of fatty acids.
Wow.
So yeah, they found that with the bacteria and the phyto, it was the best thing wasn't either one, but to use them together.
Cool. Well, that's very interesting. I'm glad I'm doing the right thing, but now I gotta add a couple other strains of phytoplankton to my repertoire, so to speak. But I'll worry about that later. That's my problem, not anybody else's. So the next question, and I'm gonna try to keep going a little bit quicker. We have a couple like these. I feel like these should be hopefully quicker answers. So this is coming from Yama. What is the best time of day to dose ProBio or PNSB? And is it beneficial more for newer tanks or mature tanks?
Both. But as we touched on, I would prefer to use substrate sauce for a new tank.
Yep.
And then after it's cycled, switch to PNS ProBio. That's the one that will consume all the detritus faster, though it's not as good as eating ammonia, right? Like substrate sauce. So start with substrate sauce, maybe just one bottle, and then move on to ProBio and continue to use that.
Perfect. And is there a specific time of day that makes more sense to dose this?
Yeah, so we recommend cutting the skimmer.
Okay.
No, because skimmers definitely do remove bacteria. They remove a lot of bacteria. There's Sanjay Joshi put out a paper that showed that tanks that skimmed heavily had about 1/10 of the bacteria of an unskimmed aquarium or a natural reef. So that's a lot. It's what 90% you skim out with a protein skimmer. So there are definitely implications for, like, skimmers can't remove nitrate or phosphate, for example, not directly, whereas the bacteria can. So you're cheating yourself there. My recommendation, and I know, like, this is one of those things where argue with me if you will. It's a
people
hobby.
Here that will probably.
Yeah, so that's cool. But my thing isn't necessarily to. I went from like not thinking that like anything would live without a skimmer to not using a skimmer at all.
Wow.
And then I've ended up somewhere in the middle. So for example, you're using these bacteria or some other bacteria, maybe you're carbon dosing, whatever. You're relying on bacterial productivity to export nitrate and or phosphate, right?
Yes.
Well, how the hell is that going to happen unless you have some way to export it? That's what the skimmer's for. You just don't want to overdo it, not to where you only have like 10% of what's on a natural reef or in a typical healthy aquarium. So I would say run your skimmer maybe 50% of the time.
Wow. So maybe on, like, if you have a controller or a timer or something,
a timer,
kind of adjust. Yeah.
And the best time to do that, I think, would be at night, because that would help stabilize your pH, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're aerating the water at that point, and it makes more sense. And there's a couple people here that run CO2 media in their skimmers, and they're trying to bump their pH super high. Like, there's a couple people in here that run their pH is like 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, and I'm like, they're getting crazy growth. That's great, but that's too much for me.
Yeah,
but
that actually answers the question, because then by default you would have to add the bacteria in the morning, right, after the skimmer goes out. So, then that 12 hours is plenty time for them to. I mean, they can actually
bacteria kind of migrates a little bit more towards light, so it's almost makes sense that you want to kind of keep them during the day, right?
Well, hey, putting them in light, that would yeah, during the day, then they'd maybe migrate up towards. If you wanted them, for feeding, to draw them into the. But at night, if you want them to settle into the substrate, but that could be another thing. I think you saw someone said something about how to dose ideally, and we can touch upon that in a bit.
Yep. So, all right, let's keep going. I'm sorry, this is going on a little long, but I mean, hey, the people are still here. We'll get to the giveaway in like 2 seconds. So I apologize if anybody's waiting to leave for that. So I feel like I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. So, so somebody wants to know, this is Blather Drift, when they're going to be available in Canada, or if they're going to be more available in Canada.
Yeah. So I thought I had a good distributor in Canada, and then they just kind of, I don't know where they're at. So, sometimes you got to like work with different people, and internationally that takes a little longer, just with all the, so right now, I guess there was an interruption in the supply from Algae Barn to some international areas. I know that they're working on Fish and Wildlife Department up there, something like that. But once they get that all squared away, you'll probably be able to get all these products from Algae Barn again. So I would keep watching there, and ask LFSs, because they'll ask their suppliers, and the suppliers will eventually come around to asking me. So I'm still looking myself, but anyone that wants it would definitely expedite the process by asking for it.
All right, so everybody talk to your LFS. Make sure you've mentioned Hydrospace LLC, and hopefully they can get them into their stock. I mean, there's nothing else I can do aside from that, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right, so we're going to get on to the silly questions. These are 2 quick silly questions. I'm not going to mention their name. You met one of them the other day. So what's up with the smell of ProBio and yellow snow? What's going on?
All right. So, they're anaerobic products. Okay, they're going to stink. Compare them to any other anaerobic product. These things come out like perfume. Okay, especially well, ProBio does, right?
Okay.
So, ProBio is actually reformulated. The original formula, nasty. Like the people that tested it early and like when we first came out with it, they literally like chased people out of the house. It was dosing their tanks, and I'm like, we can't sell this. Well, it was bad. Okay, so we made some improvements, and actually the product is better too, which is nice, but it smells a lot less. It's more like a kombucha
Oh,
kind of
jeez. Yeah. No, that
herbally.
sounds right. Yeah.
Right. So it's got that fermentative kind of smell to it. I think it's like kombucha, and I don't think it's that effective compared to. So other PNSB products have so that when they do the mineral stuff, they throw a lot of sulfur in it,
Yeah.
and
That's
it makes sulfides. Yeah, and that smells super nasty. It can't be good for your aquarium either. I would think to dump in all those sulfides. That's why they smell like rotten eggs. Some of the other anaerobic products, and I know some of the agricultural versions of these products out there smell way worse. So I'm actually kind of proud of like how little ProBio. It's a relative thing, right? Now with yellow snow, yes, it literally, and I don't mean to be gross or weird but it literally smells like ass juice.
no.
We all know we all know, right?
I didn't mean to weigh
Well,
in.
I'm sorry. People will get it, and I'm like, okay. They'll be like, "Is this okay?" And I'm like,
Yes.
"Well, does it smell like ass or death?" And they're like, "It smells like ass." I'm like, "Cool, dude, all good."
So,
So
so that
I'm
was my
sorry about
reaction.
yellow
I
snow, but
cracked that bottle open. I was just like, "Whoa, this is a little off." Maybe it was
yellow
me.
snow.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So believe it or not, so my first bottle of ProBio, I opened that up and it was like, "Holy damn, this is ass." I'm putting it back. Yellow snow didn't smell as bad to me. Maybe it's because I didn't shake it up the first time, and I'm assuming that my second bottle of yellow snow, once I shook it up, that shit's. Sorry, I don't mean to. It smelled horrible, and it was one of
Yeah.
those like it smells so much worse than ProBio. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Really, huh?
Yeah, no. So that's actually a question to have for the follow up in the, I guess the advanced portion of our conversation, which probably I won't be able to keep that conversation going, but we'll see. But yeah, no, I was a little concerned because two bottles smelled pretty different for me.
They're very, very
That's
different. Yeah.
yeah, no. I mean the first batch, the second batch, like it was a
Oh,
very yeah, it was the Yellowstone specifically, but that's a different conversation. We'll get
hmm.
into that into the I guess quality control that I have. I'm more curious batch to batch if there's differences, but that's different. And one other person asked, and I'm going to ask the question: is it edible? And you know what? You don't have to answer that. This is not the FDA. I'm gonna don't drink this stuff because somebody else said this bottle looks really nice and they want to drink out of it. So okay,
Anybody know Scott from OSA?
ooh, I don't know.
Oh,
Somebody else is typing. I see people
ask.
typing, and
So people have always asked or suggested they were going to try tasting this or whatever, or seeing if they could get like Chad Clayton um, from uh, from Reed because he's always drinking their Fido and stuff.
yeah, no, I'm not
I
interested.
ain't touching this crap. And believe it or not, so Rhodopseudomonas is they use that in a lot of human probiotics.
Oh, that's actually pretty interesting. All right,
Yeah,
well,
and chickens and everything. But yeah, I'm like, I'm not. I smell this all day. I'm like, nah. Well, so I never knew because nobody ever said they make jokes because the bottles sometimes look like
so that's actually somebody
something.
said literally in the chat right now. Why put it in
Yeah.
a beverage bottle if it's not edible? Because it must be.
Well, I never thought anyone would do this, right? But so like I sent samples to Ocean State Aquatics out in out east to Scott to try, and he didn't try them. The bottle expired, dude. This is an
Oh,
expired bottle of yellow snow, right?
oh.
And I don't want to say because I mean but I think it was after I think they said it was after a night of drinking or something. And he grabbed one and chugged it and like
Sorry, I'm laughing
yeah,
too
it
hard about
wasn't
that.
good. It wasn't good at
Yeah,
all. So anyone who wants to know, ask him. He's the
but he's
only person I
alive.
know of to ever taste it.
Well,
So
that's good to know. And there's people in this chat that will probably do that, which I hope they don't. I'm just going to say
Film
this.
it.
Don't
Film
do
it and send it to me.
or do that, but we don't assume any liability. This
I didn't recommend it. I only
There you
said if you do it, I want to see it.
All right. That being said, I think that moves us to the next part. And this is the part that I feel like a lot of people just want to be a part of.